All right, good morning. Once again, good to see everybody here. Hope y'all are having a great Sunday. You know, have you ever, and this is kind of a rhetorical question because I think I know the answer to this, but have you ever lost motivation for something? I think we've all kind of you just lose motivation. It's like, maybe it's before you start something, you have some project at home and you're just like, I really don't feel like doing this. Or maybe it's just getting out of bed. It's like you just lack motivation even to get out of bed. Maybe it's to write a paper for school. Maybe it's to go to work and continue the 9-to-5 day-to-day work week. It could be a lot of things. You think about it and you realize that this is something I have to do, but I really have no motivation whatsoever. Or maybe it's something that you've already started. Maybe it's a project you're working at home and you get well into the project and you just magically just lose all motivation for even completing it. Maybe because you're physically tired, mentally tired, or you just don't really, for whatever reason, you just don't feel like completing it. I think we've all experienced those times when we're just like, I'm just done. I'm done with this. I have no motivation whatsoever. I'm running on an empty tank when it comes to motivation. Well, this morning we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about motivation. And this is going to be a very simple message because I'm going to submit to you that there's really one thing that you need for motivation. I'm not going to give you a list of 7 things, do these 7 things and you'll find motivation. It's just one, maybe everything in life, if not most things in your life. And we want to analyze that and think about it because we need motivation, whether it's just in the day-to-day mundane things or when it's doing the work of the Lord, rendering care to others or ministering to others or just being diligent in our daily readings or coming to church, whatever it is that we might be challenged to be motivated for. Hopefully this sermon, this message will help us to find that motivation by utilizing this one thing that we're going to talk about. What I would argue to be probably one of the most romantic chapters in all of Scripture. You know, typically when you think about romantic scriptures, your mind probably automatically goes to like Ruth, or you would go to Song of Solomon, obviously. Very romantic literature and writings by inspired writers. And Genesis chapter 29 is very much overlooked, I think, oftentimes. But it's a very romantic chapter. Here, in the context, you have Jacob. Now, Jacob was of the promised lineage. Abraham had given the promise that God was going to bless all nations through him. They were going to receive the land that they were dwelling in. That promise was handed down to his son, to Isaac. And then, once again, it was passed down, not to Esau, the older brother, but to Jacob, the younger twin of Isaac. However, Jacob is not married yet, and he doesn't have a wife. And there's really 2 things of why Jacob needs to go seek a wife. One of them was because his brother wanted to kill him, and he needed to get out of the house. So Rebecca says, you know what? She goes to Isaac and says, send Jacob off to find a wife, because she knows, because Jacob had basically taken Esau's birthright and also his blessing, that Esau wanted to kill him. So he's like, well, why don't we send him off to find a wife? We don't want him to find a wife within the people that we're living in. The people that are living in didn't carry the same heritage, the same faith that they did. And so Isaac agrees, yeah, let's send Jacob back to Padan Aram, which was near Haran, where a lot of their family was still residing. Let's send him back to his relatives and he can find a wife there. So Jacob takes off and he heads up north towards Padan Aram. On the way, you have that whole story where he sleeps with a stone for a pillow, the ladder ascending up into heaven. After he gets past all that, he continues on his journey, and eventually he makes it to Padan Aram. And while he's there, he comes across this well. You have these 3 flocks of sheep that are coming to the well, and these shepherds that are kind of gathered around the well. And Jacob's like, what's going on? Because it's the middle of the day. The sheep should be out, they should be finding pasture right now. They should be eating. And the shepherds say, well, they haven't all come in yet. We need them all here so that we can roll. There's this big heavy stone on top of the well. We need them to come so that we can basically move the stone off so that we can give them water. There might be some implications there that they were using the animals to move the stone because it was so heavy. But nonetheless, they're kind of delaying in this thing. And then as this is going on and as he's discussing these things with the shepherds, here comes Rachel. Rachel comes, and she's a shepherdess, and she's coming with her flock, and she's a beautiful woman. Just excelled in beauty, just like we read about with Rebecca, just as we read about with Sarah. So it was with Rachel. She was just a beautiful, beautiful woman. And for the guys present here, you know what happens when a beautiful woman comes. All of a sudden, you find a lot of strength. And so Jacob moves the stone off of the mouth of the well, and all of a sudden now they can water the flocks, the sheep. Well, as a result of this, there's some conversation to go on. Of course, Jacob goes up to Rachel. He kisses her. He begins to cry and to weep there when he meets her. And she finds out, of course, that he's her cousin. And she goes and tells her father, Laban, who was his uncle, that he's there. And so Laban invites him in. And for a month, Jacob is kind of working for Laban, but he's not making any money. He's just basically just kind of hanging out there with the family, helping out with the livestock and stuff. Well, it gets to the point where Laban says, look, this isn't right. You're working for me for free. Name your wages. And that's kind of where we want to get to in this story. And in verse 18, it says, now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me. Verse 20, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they were in his sight but a few days, because of his love for her. Think about that, 7 years. And think about, just what love was demonstrated through this. Think about if you're Rachel, How would it feel to know that there's a guy out there who's probably very good looking, given, his mother and his grandmother were both very good looking people. Maybe he had received some of those good looks. He's a good looking guy. He comes from a rich family. His dad's extremely wealthy. He could probably marry just about anybody that he wanted to. But for you specifically, he's out there working every single day for 7 years. And that's working in the cold and the freezing rain in some seasons. That's working in the heat of the day in other seasons. That's getting up early in the morning, tending to the animals, working hard, dealing with your difficult father. We found out later that Laban's a very horrible boss to work for, but he's dealing with Laban. He's dealing with all the difficulties and hardships that come with manual labor and stuff. And he's getting up every day, motivated by his love for you. And every day he's getting up and working. And he's so motivated by that the days just pass by and the 7 years seem like nothing. We all use the phrase, I think, time flies when you're having fun. Well, for Jacob, time flies when you're in love. And he was desperately in love with Rachel. And every day, you can just imagine him, every day just with thoughts of Rachel in his mind, what it'll be like when he marries her, her beautiful face probably in his mind's eye, just thinking about how he can't wait to marry her and being motivated by that as he goes through the day-to-day tasks that he had to deal with. And so we find with Jacob a motivation that allowed him to go through some of the most difficult things we can imagine he might have gone through, and also to persevere over 7 years through all of that. And we'll even find out later, or if you continue to read later, you'll find that even when Laban tricks him and gives him Leah instead of Rachel, still he commits to another 7 years to have Rachel. So love was the motivation to Jacob to keep going, the motivation to get to work, first of all, and then the motivation to keep going. And so here in this story, we find that one of the key motivators in life is love. And when we talk about love, love is a very slippery term, right? We know that there's all different types of love. And even in the Greek New Testament, there's different words used to talk about brotherly love, and then there's love, sexual love, and then there's also agape love, which is selfless love. There's all different types of words for love. But I submit to you that any love, any type of love, is a motivation to action and to keep action moving. Think about this, how many people recently or, just over the years go to a football game in the freezing rain, sub-freezing temperatures, sit out there for like 3 hours in cold stadium seats to watch people on a field that have no impact on their life whatsoever practically, to sit out there and watch that for hours upon hours. And you can just see them on TV. They just look miserable. In the freezing rain, just freezing cold. Why would they do that? What would cause a person to do that? If you eliminate everything else and you just saw a person doing that, you'd be like, they have lost their mind. How could they do that? Well, it's their love for the game. It's their passion for the game, and it's their love for their team that they're rooting for. Or if they have a child playing, it might be the love for their child that puts them on those stadium seats and causes them to watch these games. Love is a great motivator. You could think about people who love to hunt. Hunters endure a lot of hardships sometimes to go hunting. Again, adverse weather, all types of different financial, sometimes it's very financially burdensome to hunt, depending on what type of hunting you're doing. But we do that because we love it, because we love what we're doing. You're thinking about sacrifices that mothers make for their children. If you just looked at it from a practical standpoint, you say, why is the mother, giving up eating tonight so that the kids have something to eat? Or why is the mother staying up in sleepless hours of the night to care for that infant who, on a practical standpoint, has nothing to offer her whatsoever? It's love. Love is the motivation for these things. Why is it that someone who hates school, goes through 12 years of school, hates every day of it, but finds a subject in college that they're passionate about, that they love, and all of a sudden they're all about school and they jump in feet first and they basically go through school, persevere, and get a degree? Again, it's love, and we can see how love is a great motivator. Love is something that drives us forward to do things that we wouldn't normally do, all things being equal. And so that's what we want to kind of focus on here this morning. Love, using love as motivation for life. And before we can really dive into this, we got to understand, well, what is love? Now, I'm sure perhaps a lot of you, if not most of you, have heard the phrase, love is a verb. Have you ever heard that before? Love is a verb. And what they mean by that, whether it's a preacher saying it or you see it in a meme somewhere on social media, the point is accurate and it's good, and I stand behind it. I think what they're saying is accurate in the sense that love is a verb, in the sense that love must be demonstrated in action. In other words, you can't just say, well, I love someone, and then sit back and never care for them or do things that are loving towards them. My husband's just saying, well, I love my wife, but he tramples all over her, misuses her, and things like that. Love requires action. And we could go to James chapter 2 where it talks about, don't just say to your brother or sister, be warmed and filled. That doesn't do any good until you actually give them clothing and you give them food by which they can be warm and filled. And so there's truth to that. And I'm not going to try to take away from that. Matter of fact, we would want to affirm that. But there's also a sense in which love is a noun. Love is a noun. Love is used as a noun probably a lot more than you would think in the New Testament. But I think it's, rather than going to a Greek dictionary and looking that up, it would be good to look in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 in the first few verses, and we'll see exactly how it's a noun. How it's not just an action, but it's actually something that you have, something that you possess. That's separate than action. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 1, the Apostle Paul says, if I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And then listen to verse 3. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. If you look in the original language, love there is being used as a noun, which means that love might even be separate from your actions. Because if you just read this and you're thinking love is always action, you might say, well, isn't giving your possessions to feed the poor, isn't that love then? Isn't giving your body to be burned with the assumption that you're having it burned for the benefit of somebody else or for love for God or something like that? Wouldn't that be love? But Paul says you can do those things and still not have love. So yes, love is demonstrated in action, but it's not just action. It's something that you possess, something that you must have. And when we think about it in terms of a noun, as a thing that you have within your heart, it really just boils down to having goodwill towards others, caring for other people, having a desire for the best for other people. Even if you don't have the opportunity to express it in action, you can still have love for other people in that you have good intentions towards them, goodwill towards them, and a care for them that resides within your heart. And so love can be seen as a noun. And you say, well, why is that so important? Well, because, if we think about love as a motivation, if we just think love is an action, then you think, well, I have to already be doing love in order to be motivated by love, but I'm already doing the love. So you can see how you need to see that love is an objective disposition of heart that resides within us that then turns into action and becomes the motivation for the things that we do. And so that becomes very important. It's also important in knowing exactly how we relate with love and how it is that we can use love as motivation. Because as we think about love as a thing, as this disposition of heart, or this goodwill that we have towards others, this care for others, there's an error that we might make in connection to this in thinking that, and this oftentimes is the case, where people say, well, you either have love or you don't have love. Love is not a choice. It's just something that you have. It's not really something that you can choose to have. And so people will say, well, they think of love as, well, you either love ice cream or you don't love ice cream. You either love pizza or you don't love pizza. I either love this individual or I don't love this individual. That's just the way it is. And you could go through all the different types of love, perhaps, as you're thinking about that. But it becomes very clear in the New Testament that love is a choice. That it's a thing, and it's also something that we can create. We can actually create love in our hearts. It's something that we can actually bring about in our hearts. In John chapter 13, Jesus actually commands us to love. And this is probably the most direct statement we can find in the New Testament about being commanded to love. This is John 13, verse 34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. How could Jesus command love if love wasn't a choice? If you just kind of had to wait around to be struck by love. Love is a choice. We're commanded to love. We're commanded to have this goodwill, this disposition of care and concern for other people that put other people above ourselves, Philippians chapter 2, that really has a genuine, sincere care for others. That's a choice that we make. That's something that we choose to do. It's always a motivating factor and then as such, it can be a motivating factor for our lives. So what this shows is that we have to choose to love, that we can choose to love other people. It's something that we can possess as a thing within our hearts, and as such, it then can motivate us. So Jesus talks about this love as a motivation. In John chapter 14, Jesus says that this is a motivator for even obeying him. In John 14 and verse 23, it says, Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. Notice how that is placed. It doesn't say, if you keep my commandments, then you'll love me. He says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my commandments. In other words, to truly and absolutely keep the commandments of Christ, the foundation of that, and as we're talking about it here, the motivation for that is love for Christ. If you love him, you will keep his commandments. Jesus would later say in John, while he's sitting with his disciples in chapter 21, eating a meal with them, he's going to turn to Peter. And the topic of love is going to come up starting in verse 15. It says, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, shepherd my sheep. And he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Now there's a lot to be said on that, and we covered it when we were going verse by verse through the book of John. But in summary, we just say that what was the basis of the tending the sheep, feeding the sheep, all these different things? Love for Jesus. It's the love of Jesus that motivates for action and for obeying Jesus in what he commands us to do. So then the question might come up, well, how do we love then? As we look at the people around us, there's some people that are difficult to love. Love isn't always easy. It's not always an easy choice. It is a choice, but it's not always an easy choice. But it's something that we can choose to do, and there's some things that we can do to help cultivate this love, to create this love and also cultivate this love. And one of them we find in 1 John chapter 4. In John chapter 4 and verse 19, the Apostle John says, we love because he first loved us. If another individual is giving you no reasons to love them whatsoever, maybe they have a difficult personality, maybe they're hard to get along with, maybe they've wronged you in a lot of different ways, maybe they've hurt you, or whatever the case may be, and you're struggling to find love for that individual, it's important to remember that your love for that individual is not based upon their good character and on their worthiness of your love. We love because he first loved us. It's not based on that individual's love for me. It's based upon Jesus' love for me. And because he loved me, now I can love others, even though they may not be lovable and be caring towards myself. Think about this. In Romans chapter 5, we're told that he loved us. Even while we were sinners, Jesus gave himself up for us. In other words, he didn't wait for us to be good people, to get cleaned up and to be living a perfect life. He says, okay, I think you're worthy enough now. Now I'll die for you. I'll come and die on the cross. While we were yet sinners, he loved us and gave himself up for us. And the same thing is true with the people that we come into contact with. While they are yet sinners, while they are yet not perfect, while they are still obstinate, ugly perhaps, mean-faced, whatever the case may be, even in the condition that they're in, we love them. We love them. Why? Because love isn't based on the character of the individual that you're loving. It's based upon the love that you experience through Jesus Christ. And that's why Jesus, of all people, could command us to love our enemies. To love those who persecute you, love those who malign you, those who, drag your name through the filth and slander you and say all manner of evil things against you for my sake. He says, you need to love those individuals. And how could that be unless we don't base it on them? We base it on what Jesus has done for us. But then also there's another thing that we can do to cultivate this love, and that is to walk in the Spirit. In Galatians chapter 5, we see kind of a contrast between the deeds of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. And if we're living according to the flesh, this is what the Apostle Paul says will come out. Sexual immorality, this is starting in verse 19. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. Nowhere in that list is love. As a matter of fact, the things in that list are completely contrasted to love, especially like selfish ambition. If we're just trying to love people because we're trying to just naturally love them according to the flesh, it's not going to work. It'll work with some. With some we might have natural affection for, like our children. For other people who might treat us well, But to have the true, genuine love, that goodwill towards other people, even to people who are our enemies, who fight against us, who don't return that love, we can't do that through the flesh. We can't just rely on natural feelings towards other people. What do we have to do? We have to live according to the Spirit. In verse 22, the Apostle Paul contrasts the fruit of the Spirit with those deeds of flesh, and the very first fruit that he lists is love. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. If we're struggling to love someone, and it is difficult. I'm not trying to say, well, oh, it's so easy. Just love the person. Just think about Jesus and you love. I know it's difficult. Personally, I think we've all had people that it's just difficult to love. But I tell you, it's going to be nearly impossible if we're just trying to do it according to the flesh. If we set our minds on the Spirit, if we're seeking the things above, not the things on this earth, if we really have the proper perspective, if we're living in communion with God all the time, in prayer with God, if we're saturating our minds and our hearts with His Word, if we're really living in a close and tight relationship with God, and we're constantly have our minds on the Spirit, and we live a life that transcends just the things of this earth, is able to rise above what's going on this earth and be able to look at things through God's eyes and God's perspective, because we're so in tune with Him that we're able to do so. When we're in when we're in that mindset, and when we have our mind set on the Spirit, what's going to be produced out of that is love. Why? Because God has love for all. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And the more and more we're in tune with the heart of God, are walking according to the Spirit, the more and more the heart of God will be demonstrated in our lives in the way that we not only deal with other people, but view other people and relate with other people. Another way we do this is just by seeing the intrinsic value in other people. Remember in Genesis chapter 1, we're told that all people, or God created man and woman in the image of God. He created them. Each person is made in the image of God. Each person has the image of God within them. Now that image might have been marred and scarred, and might have a lot of stuff piled up under it, but beneath it all, when it just comes to their mere existence, they're made in the image of God, and to value them as such. But also to remember, as we're looking at other people, and as we're interrelating with other people, that individual, whoever it might be, Jesus died for that person just like they died for you. Think about that. Jesus, in all of His glory up in heaven, came down from that, descended to earth, took on the form of a servant, took on the form of a man, and even died on the cross for you and for that individual. That individual may not be taking advantage of that and walking in that, but still Jesus died so that would be for them, so that would be able to be offered to them. And so how can we look in the face of someone who Jesus died for and have bitterness and jealousy or evil intentions towards? Jesus died for that person. Who am I to not love that person? If anyone should hate Him, or even me or anyone else, it should be Jesus, because He's perfect and pure and lovely and good and beautiful and everything that is good. And yet He can love filthy sinners. I myself, as a filthy sinner, then ought to be able to look at other sinners and love them the same way. And so there's a lot of different angles you can take in conjuring up this love and creating this love for other people. But you'll find that if you allow that to happen, or if you intentionally cause that to happen, I should say, that now we have motivation to action. Motivation for everything. A father who has to maybe go to a difficult job to provide for his family. I wake up every day. Why? So my family is provided for. When I go to work, I might have a difficult boss. But I remember the scriptures that tell me, don't work as though you're working for him. Do it as though you're working for Christ. I remember, I'm not necessarily obeying him because he's a great boss, but because of my love for Christ. There's so many different scenarios. We can't go through every scenario, but just the general idea that if we're lacking motivation in anything in our lives, generally speaking, but even specifically speaking when it comes to spiritual things, it might be that we're running on an empty tank when it comes to love. The problem with motivation is that a lot of times we just wait for it to strike us, to say, all right, well, I'm not really motivated to go out and do the Lord's work. I'm not really motivated to read my Bible. I'm not even motivated to go to church, or whatever the case may be. I just don't have the motivation. And so we kind of just wait around for it to just kind of magically strike us like lightning, and then all of a sudden maybe one day I'll be motivated to do these things. But what we're missing out on is the fact that we might be running low on the very thing that would motivate us to do those things. As we fill the tank of our hearts up with love, we'll find ourselves motivated to do the things that we're called to do. If we're struggling to maintain a relationship with God, if we're struggling to engage in the spiritual disciplines of Bible reading, worship, prayer, all those other things, we might need to sit back and look at our fuel tank and say, is my love tank low right now? Is my love for Christ very low right now? If not, I need to fill up the tank. I need to remember what he's done for me. I need to remember how he died for me. I need to remember how he left heaven for me. I need to remember how he's promised his presence to be with me in this very moment. I need to remember that Christ put me first, and therefore now I need to put him first, and should be motivated to put him first. To do all these other things we already talked about, to fill up our love tank for God and our love tank for others. Then we'll find ourselves like Jacob, saying, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to be motivated to do this. Why? Because I'm doing it for my wife, or I'm doing it for my kids, or I'm doing it for Christ, or I'm doing it for that other person that needs my help, that needs my care. I'm doing it because inside within me is a burning fire of love. And that gets me going and gets me moving forward. If we do that, it might very well be the case that those days that it feels like the minute hand on the clock is slowly ticking, and every moment is drudgery and difficult, it could be that we'll be flying through our days, motivated by love, passionate for what we're doing, moving forward out of love for God and love for man, and doing these things, again, with love as our motivation and love as our passion. So that's basically our lesson. Again, a very simple thing. Love. Love is the answer. Surprising, huh? Love is the answer. If you're having a hard time getting motivated for whatever it is, serving the Lord, serving others, or even just things in life, let love motivate you. God has given us every reason to know what love looks like, what love is, and how to demonstrate it. All we got to do is incorporate it in our hearts and our minds, intentionally put it in the forefront of our minds, and use that to drive us forward. So that's our encouragement this morning. If you're here this morning, God loved you, and he gave his son to die for you. And out of return for that love, he's asking you to give your life to him, to commit your life to him. He'll promise you and offer you, or he does promise you and offer you eternal life, eternal joy, eternal bliss, a situation in which there's no crying or tears or dying or sickness for eternity. He's just asking you to give this one little, speck of time, your life, to him, so that he can give those things to you. Will you give your life to God today? Will you answer the call that he has for you to love him, to be committed to Christ, to believe in his son, to confess him, to repent of your sins and be baptized in his name? If you would do that, please